Three Memphis cops just got acquitted for their role in the brutal beating death of Tyree Nichols. The video was horrifying. The outrage was universal, at least online, but in the courtroom, a jury saw it and said, not guilty. Why? That's what we're going to unpack, and the answer probably going to piss you off. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. I'm as surprised as anyone. I was scrolling YouTube, saw that there was a verdict in the Tyree Nichols trial, decided to watch it, and to my dismay, I heard not guilty for all charges in relationship to these three Memphis police officers. So if you haven't seen it, let's go to the courtroom and watch as the verdict was read in real time.
Court will read the verdict as follows. In indictment 2300241, State of Tennessee versus Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. If counsel would like to stand with their clients. The verdicts read as follows. Count 1, second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justice Smith, not guilty. Count 2. Aggravated assault, acting in concert. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 3. Aggravated kidnapping with bodily injury. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 4. Aggravated kidnapping with a deadly weapon. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 5. Official misconduct, unauthorized exercise of official authority. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 5. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 5. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 6. Official misconduct, refraining from performing a duty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 7. Official oppression. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 7. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 7. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. All verdict forms have been signed by the foreperson. Attorneys, you can have a seat with your clients. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have performed your duty. We appreciate the time and attention that you all have given to this case.
Okay, so quick recap of the case. January 2023, Tyree Nichols is pulled over and beaten by members of the now shamed and disbanded Scorpion unit from the Memphis Police Department. And if you listen to any of the testimony about this unit, they were nothing but the sort of thugs that you would see on a Hollywood movie riddled with corruption and talking about undercover operator units, right? That's what these guys were. You can tell by the way that they operated. You could tell by the way he was approached when he first made contact with the officers. A couple months after the arrest, after a basically uprising from the community, they released the body cam video, which showed him being chased very briefly, pepper sprayed, severely beaten across two different scenes while offering little to no resistance. They ended up taking him into custody, but that custody was quickly transferred to the hospital where he died 3 days later. His cause of death was revealed as blunt force trauma to the head. So these guys were ultimately criminally charged both federally and on the state level. They have been convicted, all 5 of them, on some level in federal court for various renditions of deprivation of rights under color of law. And they are all awaiting sentencing, and they will probably all go to federal prison for some period of time, but not forever, and not probably what they would have gotten had they been convicted on state level murder charges. They were ultimately charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, official misconduct, oppression. So today we get the jury verdict, not guilty on all charges. Now, 2 of the officers, Desmond Mills and Emmett Martin III, had already accepted plea agreements and turned state's evidence so that they could give sort of the behind the scenes information about how the unit operated and how we ended up here. And then they also testified to their efforts to cover it up, evidence tampering, all this stuff. So these 2 had already accepted plea agreements with the state and had already accepted plea agreements with the federal government. The 3 officers that had not entered into any sort of agreement with the state were Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. So let's walk through the charges under Tennessee state law and see what the elements the state of Tennessee should have been able to prove in order to convict these guys. So number 1, let's look at second-degree murder. Okay, second-degree murder is a knowing killing of another, but under subsection B here, we have an important section here. It says, in a prosecution for a violation of this section, if the defendant knowingly engages in multiple incidents of domestic abuse, assault, or the infliction of bodily injury against a single victim, the trier of fact may infer that the defendant was aware that the cumulative effect of the conduct was reasonably certain to result in the death of the victim, regardless of whether any single incident would have resulted in death. Now, you may not know this, but the trier of law in a criminal case is the judge, and a trier of fact is the jury. In other words, the judge makes determinations about evidentiary rulings and whether or not something has a legal connotation or what the legality of the jury instructions and those type of things. They make interpretations of the law and they decide what comes in and out of the trial as far as evidence goes. When it comes to the trier of fact, it is the jury. The jury decides who's a credible witness, who they believe and don't believe, what they think the facts were, so on and so forth. So it would have been up to the jury to infer that these guys understood that repeatedly beating him was going to result in his death. So again, we have cumulative effect of beatings on the same victim, but for whatever reason, and we'll get to that in a little bit, the jury didn't see it as them being so far out of line that they should have known they were going to cause this guy's death. Now, aggravated kidnapping, I could see the jury saying, although to be clear, I believe this was aggravated kidnapping because I believe that they were outside of their privilege as police officers at this point. But the jury probably saw them as trying to make a lawful arrest, so they weren't going to convict them of aggravated kidnapping, in my opinion. But you got aggravated assault, and this was one that really puzzled me. So let's look up aggravated assault and we'll go through it. So to understand aggravated assault, you have to understand what assault is, because basically aggravated is just a level up from assault. So a person commits an assault who, 1, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causes bodily injury to another. Number 2, intentionally or knowingly causes another to reasonably fear imminent bodily injury. Or 3, intentionally or knowingly causes physical contact with another and a reasonable person would regard the contact as extremely offensive or provocative. So that's your basic assault. Well, aggravated assault is generally classified it a little bit differently. So it's usually about the result. So you commit a regular assault and the result is that there's serious bodily injury or death, or your assault involves the use or display of a deadly weapon, or your assault involved strangulation. Or then under subsection B, you can recklessly commit the first assault and then have the same sort of results. Serious bodily injury, results in death, or involve the use of a deadly weapon. And so recklessly, in general parlance in criminal law, is where you disregard a substantial and known risk. Like you should have known this was going to happen and you said, to hell with it anyway, right? That's what recklessness and sort of general understanding is. So they found him not guilty of aggravated assault too, which I just don't get. It basically comes down to what I think is jury nullification, but we'll get that in a little bit. All right, so the next thing is official misconduct. We'll pull that up. So a public servant commits an offense who, with intent to obtain a benefit or to harm another, intentionally or knowingly, commits an act relating to the public servant's office, that would be a police officer, that constitutes an unauthorized exercise of official power. Well, the federal conviction should have been enough to convict them of this because they've already been found guilty in the federal courtroom, and everybody knows it at this point. So how they missed this, I have no idea. Even if you thought that it wasn't intentional, even if you couldn't find recklessness, how you could just let these guys off with nothing when you have something as easy as official misconduct. It's very obvious this was not a lawful situation, but not guilty. Okay, let's move on to official oppression. A public servant acting under the color of office or employment commits an offense who intentionally subjects another to mistreatment or to arrest, detention, stop, frisk, halt, search, seizure, dispossession, assessment, or lien when the public servant knows the conduct is unlawful, or intentionally denies or impedes another in the exercise or enjoyment of any right, privilege, power, or immunity when the public servant knows the conduct is unlawful. Well, again, the federal trial has already proven this. And it became admitted evidence, testimony, that these guys had been convicted. It's well known these guys had already been convicted in a federal courtroom. Now, I don't know, maybe the judge didn't allow that in for the jury, but Desmond Mills testified that he had accepted a plea deal in federal court. It should have been assumed that that was a slam dunk. So another felony, not guilty. So what is this really about? Let's be clear. This wasn't a question of whether the beating happened. It did. The video's there. The question was whether it was a crime. And it should be obvious to anybody who saw the video or anybody familiar with the circumstances. But for whatever reason, that was somehow in question. So we got to look at like what the jury saw versus what the public saw. And if you spend time on YouTube or social media, or you watch this channel, or you watch Lackluster or Civil Rights Lawyer or channels like mine, it might feel like public opinion is turning negatively towards the police. More people are watching audits. More people are scrutinizing traffic stops and calling out excessive force. But when you walk into a Tennessee courtroom, that momentum seems to vanish. And I would argue that you probably have that same dynamic that exists in almost every conservative state in the country. This jury wasn't made up of internet commenters or activists. They were pulled from a more conservative, less diverse county. They were actually pulled from Hamilton County, which is where Chattanooga is. And so they brought in their own values. And one of those is respect for police, belief in law and order, and fear of chaos. Jurors are human beings and they're conservatives in red states, and they look around and they see cops not as public servants, but as moral anchors in a declining world. I know that sounds ludicrous because we all see what we see, but you have to be careful not to become desensitized to what the others around you see because they don't see all the negative that we see. And that's why they saw the same video and said it's not a crime when you and I could look at it and see, my goodness, this should be obvious to everybody. What's obvious to you and what's obvious to me is obviously not obvious to everybody. There's this weird irony in jury dynamics when the defendant is a police officer. In most criminal cases, especially in areas where there's conservative voters, jurors implicitly trust the state. They walk in thinking, well, if the DA brought charges against the guy, he probably did it. And I always thought that was because they trusted the prosecutor. But that flips on its head when the defendant wears a badge. Suddenly that deference that I thought was going to the state seems to evaporate because we've seen time and time again, like the killing of Daniel Shaver and the killing of Philando Castile, where it's like, okay, when the defendant is a police officer, it's either break even and we'll see what the evidence suggests, or it's an outright defense of the police officer almost no matter what they did. Like the Brailsford case and the Daniel Shaver shooting was one of the worst I've ever seen in my whole life. There's another one on trial right now, Christopher Scher up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he shot Patrick Leoya in the back of the head. That one's actually in the middle of jury deliberations, and I may have an update for you on that tomorrow or the next day. But I'm not confident based on how this went that that's going to go any differently. At least it's in Michigan, which is more of a purple dynamic than it is a sea of red like it is here in Tennessee. But it's like the jury starts doing the defense attorney's job for them when the defendant is a police officer. And so that caused me to think maybe it's not the prosecutor that they actually trust. Maybe it's just that the police always get the benefit of the doubt. And what I thought was, oh my goodness, if the prosecutor's bringing charges against this defendant, they must be guilty. Maybe it's more like, no, if the police arrested this guy and brought him into court, then he must be guilty. And when the police are the defendants, it's like they lose sight of that. So I've sort of come to the understanding that the jurors don't necessarily trust the system or the government. They trust the cops. And I realize that I'll get some pushback in the comment because you guys see what I see and you've become desensitized to reality. But the truth is that the vast majority of the public trust the police. And this is just evidence of that fact. And of course, when the defense attorneys do their job, which they did here, it gets even worse because they're able to plant seeds that shouldn't matter. Like in this particular trial, the defense got in evidence about things that had nothing to do with the officers knew when they tried to jerk him out of the car and beat him. Like they jerked him directly out of the car, didn't give him an opportunity to get out. We're talking about like a quarter mile, I wouldn't even call it a pursuit, evasion that started the beginning of the end for this guy with him being jerked out of the car and surrounded by people that were getting ready to do like a gang initiation style beating. But the defense was effective in getting in certain things, like the fact that Tyree Nichols had some intoxication level, like the fact that Tyree Nichols' vehicle had multiple stolen IDs. They were able to sort of paint this guy as a drug addict and a bad guy who was stealing people's identities. And none of that had anything to do with whether or not he should have been killed. And to beat it all, they didn't even know. They had no way of knowing any of that stuff at the time that they started jerking him out of the car and beating the life out of him. But the truth is that the moment that you can color the victim, you can dilute the outrage. It's the oldest trick in the book. It's smoke and mirrors. He wasn't an angel. Well, guess what? You don't have to be an angel to deserve the opportunity to live your life until you die of natural causes. But for whatever reason, when you're dealing with the police, people don't see it that way. And we're not innocent in this. And by we, I mean me, I mean you, I mean people like us, people who think like us. Because what happens is we become so ingrained in the negative that we forget how the rest of the world thinks. There's sort of a cultural recoil that happens. We've become so tribal in our political affiliations, in our political beliefs. We live in a time of extreme rhetoric, and we've gotten to a place where people just feel like they can't trust each other. How does it happen that I can't trust my neighbor and you can't trust your neighbor, but we can both trust the freaking police? And when people feel like the other side is lying or exaggerating, even a little, they stop engaging with the issue and they start defending the target. Not because they like the person. Maybe they don't like the cops. Maybe they just don't like what you have to say about the cops. Or maybe they just don't trust what you have to say about the Republicans or the Democrats, that they swarm to defense of the truth. And then all of this gets lost in our tribalism and our polarity. So when we get on here and we talk about how all cops are bad and we say all cops are bastards or we need to defund the police or there's no such thing as a good cop, maybe you're telling the truth. But what it does is for people who have an ingrained trust in the institution of law enforcement, it creates a counter reaction. People start thinking, hold on, that's not fair. That's not a fair characterization. My cousin's a cop. My neighbor's a cop. My kid's a cop. He risks his life every single day because that's what they believe is the truth. And I know that not all cops are like that because George down the street, he ain't like that. He's a good dude. He helps cut my grandma's grass. And then before you know it, someone who might have agreed that Tyree Nichols didn't deserve to die is suddenly sympathizing with these police officers, not because of the facts, but because they feel like law enforcement as an institution is under siege. And that emotional whiplash that sort of builds a soft spot for police officers, it makes people feel like they need to balance the scales, even if it means acquitting someone who doesn't deserve to be acquitted and who actually very obviously committed the crime. And every clip we see that's negative about this and every viral moment where someone is getting slammed, punched, tased, or killed, it creates this hardened message in some corners of society. And people just say, you know what? Just comply. Don't fight the police. These are our cops. Don't fight them. And if you fight them, you deserve whatever happens to you. And that message is the one that showed up in the jury box today, whether we want to admit it or not. And in closing, when lawyers are talking to people about potentially taking their case or about you have to be a sympathetic plaintiff, don't be going out here showing your ass and assuming that people will see police and see a constitutional violation and automatically hammer the cop, because they won't do it. And lawyers know that. Look, you can say whatever you want. I've had tons and tons and tons of comments of people be like, oh, you're a lawyer, you're part of the problem. Oh, why aren't you the one suing these people? Well, here's why. Because I don't want to spend $50,000 out of my pocket or $100,000 out of my pocket litigating a case for 3.5 years. So the jury will say, nah, we understand why the cop did that because your guy's an asshole. That's why. So that's why it matters what kind of plaintiff you are. You don't have to accept what I'm saying, but before you start an argument with me or an ideological debate with me in the comments that I won't engage in, by the way, you ought to look at what happened in Memphis today and see whether or not you're actually calibrated and in line with how all this actually works. Are we delusional? Maybe so. Anyway, pretty heavy, pretty disheartened, actually devastated over this not guilty verdict. I really can't believe it. I'm actually surprised, but I wanted to bring your attention to it. Wanted to show you, hey, we need to rethink our strategy here because whatever we thought was working is not working. If this is not murder, I don't know how you prove murder. If this is not aggravated assault, I don't know how you prove aggravated assault. If this is not official misconduct, what is official misconduct? Anyway, if you want to engage with me, I invite you to head over to the Substack community. I had some people ask me, Substack is a blog site. It's where people write. It's a social media platform where people can join your sort of tribe and join your group and talk to you about stuff that may be a little bit deeper than what you cover in the video or whatever. So that's where I'm engaging with my audience. If you want to come, it's absolutely free to join. You can join on a paid tier if you'd like to, but you don't have to. It's just for people who want to support the channel monetarily. If you don't want to go to Substack, you don't like reading, you don't like blogs, and you do still want to support the Southern Draw Law channel monetarily, I'll post my Venmo and PayPal links both here on the screen as well as in the description. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel and leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.